Hi, I'm Dustin Luecke.
And I'm Candace Price. This is another edition of Hometown Conversations.
We're working to bring together community members to talk freely and openly about ways we can make effective, positive change in our community.
Yes, we want to be a platform of education, understanding, and empathy. Thank you for being here today. I think the first question I'd like to address is we have this new piece of legislation that has come out supposedly to provide more rights for LGBTQ plus people in the workplace. What do you all think of that?
Oh, I know I'm thrilled. I used to be a personnel manager, and so the company that I worked for was always kind of, they backed off as far as it being anybody's business. But that isn't true, you know, in most other places. And before the decision, if you look at it, there's like these little patchy spots where those rights were protected in the United States. And now if you look at it, it's the whole United States. It's exactly how it should be. So I'm thrilled. Aren't you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was a huge historical decision to make it clear that no one can get fired based on their sexual orientation or gender identity or perceived sexual orientation and gender identity, because you know that's real too, that people think something about somebody and that even that could have gotten somebody fired. Mm-hmm. The only, I think, setback is that that's only in the workplace. You know, we still need protections in schools, in the right to, you know, eat at a diner, you know, just to make sure that people can't discriminate against you based solely on your sexual orientation or your gender identity.
Yeah, I kind of want to build off that because it's been 50 years since the first Pride celebrations. We saw the legislation recently, and it's only been 5 years since same-sex marriage has been legalized in this country. I guess, could you put us on a timeline of maybe how far you think we've come and how far we have yet to go?
Well, I would say in the last 10 years is where we've seen some progress. It's excruciatingly slow. Like Will said, there are more things that we don't have rights in than there are. The workplace was huge. It was, don't get me wrong. Same-sex marriage, that's huge. I just got married last October.
Congratulations.
Thank you, thank you. And you know, those things are big, but there's so many things that we still have to look at. We still have to pursue protections for students in the school. Betsy DeVos is a big one. She's removing any kind of protections that kids had. Our transgender kids, she's taking their rights away, you know, for protection. It's kind of insidious, I think, because these big things like the Supreme Court decision that are huge are going on while the undercurrent is them trying to pluck away their rights, like plucking a chicken, isn't it?
Yeah, and the decision is huge because the way they wrote it, it made it very clear that whenever sex is part of policy, it made it very clear that sex includes sexual orientation and gender identity. And what that will allow for is for some of these other cases that are out there to come forward. It will kind of debunk some of what people have said is the reason for discrimination, because people had said, well, sex doesn't include sexual orientation and gender identity, therefore, you know, trans athletes or, you know, protection in the hospitals, that kind of stuff. I think people would have used that as a fight. But now the Supreme Court's already said, no, this is what it means. So I think now people will be able to come back to some of those cases and pursue them and hopefully win. But of course that takes years. Right. And for people living today, that's not soon enough. You know, there's a lot of concern, in particular, I think, for trans people in regards to if I go to a hospital, can somebody, you know, say, oh, this is a trans person, I don't want to treat them. And you know, that's life and death, terrifying kind of stuff. You know, we also see that for the trans community that trans women of color are still being murdered on a very regular basis without really any media attention.
Just last week.
Mm-hmm. And you know, those deaths are very, they're very intentional and they're horrific. And you know, we have to address that, and it's not being addressed. I think the information about schools, you know, protection for young people in schools, protections in colleges and universities, protections in hotels, you know, we still need those, all of those. And unfortunately, you know, when you live in a state that it's kind of a, you know, at will, you still can get fired, and somebody will say maybe it's, well, they're not doing their job as well as they could have. So there's still ways that people can get around it, but it is a huge victory. I think, I guess I never thought we'd get to where we are today. Like the whole idea of same-sex marriage, I didn't think I'd ever see that. And so to see some of those things happening is pretty exciting. I also think young people today, excuse me, they see the world differently. Many of them just are like, what do you mean, you know, LGBT people in the past couldn't get married? Right. And they're like, this, you know, it's part of our families, LGBT folks. I have friends, like I have taught once in a while at UWL. And when I first started 20 years ago teaching this one class, I had asked the class of 30, how many of you know someone who's LGBT? And like maybe one person would raise their hand and the rest like, no. And I'm like, no, you all have met somebody, you just don't know that you've met them.
Right.
And now if you ask that question, maybe all but one person raised their hand, and then you can say, well, who do you know? And they'll be like, oh, my aunts are gay, or, you know, my best friend is gay, or my, you know, my uncle's transgender. And it's kind of like they all know somebody. And so to them, it's like a no-brainer. And certainly that's not true for all young people, but I feel like it's more of a movement that young people are saying, like, what's the big deal?
Yeah, they're actually stepping up. I think a lot of the changes are going to happen because of the young people. You know, I worked for Bernie Sanders' campaign last time, and I walked in, and one of the young women that was working there said, oh, you know, my wife is going to be here in a few minutes. And this was in when I started, it was 2015. You know, and when she said that, I thought, oh my God, I wish I could be so, you know, so brave. And it's not bravery, it's just something different now than it used to be. I love that. I love that. I have come to a point, I'm 67 years old, and have reached a point in my life where I can now say, this is my wife, Jo. But 10 years ago, and I was a teacher, so I had to be very careful at that point. Things are slowly changing, aren't they? And I think part of it is because of our young people. I don't know if they're braver, but they live in a different world than we did too, you know. I
always joke to them that when I was a student and trying to figure out my sexual orientation at the time, you had, you know, if you wanted to go look at LGBT stuff in the library, like you had to go find that section. And it wasn't very big, if you even had it. I remember when Barnes & Noble, when I went into a Barnes & Noble, and they actually had a section, and you know, you walk down and kind of, you know, look, yeah, and you know, be prepared to look somewhere else if somebody comes. But I always joke about the fact that we had, UWL had a women, gender, and sexuality studies, although it was only women's studies at the time. They had a little library, and I went in there, and they had LGBT books. And I remember I stole the lesbian sex book just because I wanted more time with it. And I wasn't going to check it out from the library, because what was the librarian going to think when she's like, okay. Yeah. And so, you know, nowadays, you know, the youth, they just go online. And so they're watching people's stories and learning and educating themselves, which is a great thing about, you know, the access to the internet and being able to connect with people.
Right, and even just having this whole conversation with your station, this wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. You know, 5 years ago, I don't think it would have happened. So you see where there are strides. Jeff Sessions, I was trying to remember his name a minute ago. I think I repressed it, but you know, has just come right out and said that the Civil Rights Act did not apply to LGBTQ people, and they should not have any protections under it. You know, and that's the attitude in the administration. They're chiseling away at things, and I'll be perfectly honest. When I got married in October, I mean, we had known each other for 2 years, but we felt like we had to hurry up and get married before they repealed it. You know, and so there's still issues that are just under the surface like this.
So how do you talk to somebody who comes at these issues from maybe a point where they believe it's a morality standpoint? Can you have that conversation now, and how do you go about it?
Oh, I think that we probably are confronted with that constantly from people who feel like it's a morality issue. You know, I've talked to so many. In fact, we had somebody on our we have Queercast every Monday night until now, but they talk about the Bible, and they talk about you know, it's forbidden. And one of the things that I learned, as a matter of fact, was that the word homosexuality didn't even appear in the Bible until 1945, and it was placed there. It isn't necessarily a morality issue for Jesus, who never said anything about it. He didn't even bring it up. I don't think it was an issue of him forgetting. People start to make their own morality. They decide what's moral. And sometimes I think that some of the issues and some of the conversations about the morality of it are immoral themselves. And I was talking to Candace earlier and said, you know, there's one of the big main evangelists who said that he does not believe that the LGBTQ people should be included in the anti-lynching bill, that he kind of felt like it was fine if we were lynched. You know,
I wanted to touch on that because you mentioned an increase in visibility, but also we're still seeing violence against people who identify as LGBTQ+. Talk to me about those issues and who's perpetuating this violence, because I think we can all agree that's not, there's nothing moral about being violent toward anyone. So talk to me about that issue.
Well, and as Will said, there's just this horrible 2 years now thing of the trans women of color in particular being murdered. I mean, there's nothing moral about that. And who's doing that? We don't know. I don't think they've ever identified anybody that has. I don't know if they're really trying. I mean, I can't say they're not, but it's funny to me that many women, I mean, we've got about 30 now that have been murdered.
In the United States.
In the United States
we know
alone, yeah. That we know of is right. You know, who sets the moral standard? Where's our moral compass coming from? Because you can't say it's immoral and then do immoral things against LGBTQ people. You know, the 2 women on a bus in New York, somebody told them that they wanted them to kiss, and they said, no, we're not doing that, you know, and so they beat the snot out of them. You know, they were minding their business, sitting on a bus. You know, I don't know. Will, I don't know how to speak to that in terms of explanation.
Yeah. Well, I was thinking kind of to combine your questions. You know, there is a time when you can have those conversations with people, and then there's a time when I don't know that I want to waste my energy. For example, on the campus, sometimes we will get people who are preachers who will come, and their whole thing is to speak about hate against LGBT folks. And and usually there's a long list of things that they're also against, but LGBT stuff is kind of their focus. And sometimes the students will be like, you know, they're quoting the Bible, and I know the Bible too, and I know that that is wrong, and so I'm going to talk to them. And in those cases, I say, well, you can, you're right, but this person isn't here to learn from you. They're not going to hear you. You're not going to be able to have that conversation. And in those cases, I would say it's okay not to engage. In fact, it's probably better not to engage that person. When you can have a conversation with someone, usually that changes. You know, and that's why I think it has been changing for young people, because once you know somebody, you see this person and you're like, oh, you know, they're not in my mind what I thought gay people or LGBT folks were. And oftentimes, you know, when we, in this class I taught, we would talk about LGBT issues, and I would bring a panel of students, and it would always amaze me that there'd be a student in the classroom afterwards when we'd say, you know, how was this for you? They'd say, well, they're like me. And I'm like, yes, they are. And that was like this big revelation at 20 years old that, and you're like, oh my God, how can that be? And so like that gives you that conversation then, and then that changes that for that person, because they're like, well, you know, if I say those bad things, I'm saying it about this person, and I didn't think they were a bad person. But I think with the violence, especially the violence against trans women, I think that has some connection with the way we view masculinity in the world, in that anytime you put anything that isn't hyper-masculine and attach it to a man, there is this, you know, ugh. And I think what happens in some of these cases when somebody maybe views somebody as attractive, or maybe even is interested in them, and then they find out that this person is trans, and suddenly it is an attack against their masculinity. And you know, people talk about having a rage, a panic, you know, I panicked, and I, you know, no, this is all about whatever's going on in men with masculinity. And I am not, you know, I wasn't assigned male at birth. I was assigned female at birth. I'm trans, and so I can't really understand that. But I feel like that's the only thing that really can speak to this. And they are so disgusted and distraught that they, with their own, I guess, disgust that they would even feel this for this person, or even like this person, that they do the most horrific, horrible things, kind of the same things that we would have seen and still see occasionally with, you know, gay men or lesbian women, that, you know, people will, you know, hurt them in not just, I don't just kill you, I shoot you 50 times, you know, I attack your body and cut pieces off. Those, I mean, really sick, horrific things. Like one of a couple weeks ago, I think it was the week before maybe the Supreme Court decision came out, there were 2 trans women that were murdered, and one of them, you know, unfortunately, their body was cut apart and put in suitcases. But this is like the gross, horrific things that are happening to women, not only here in the United States. If you look at the numbers across the world, I mean, it's huge, and it's happening all the time. I mean, these folks are basically being thrown away with little, you know, justice for whoever did this. Rarely do I ever think they ever find whoever did it. And if they did, I've never heard that anybody's been convicted of something like that. And a lot of times when those, right, a lot of times when those folks, their murders are found, you know, even in like the press and stuff like that, they'll misgender the person. And sometimes it's because the family was not okay with the person being trans, and so they force that issue. But there's so much there. And you know, I feel sad that there's so much hate, that people have so much hate that they will say things like, I don't think the LGBT community should be taken out of that lynching. It should still be okay to lynch them. Or this idea of people, you know, brutally killing anybody. I mean, that I don't understand how that hate, how you can hate somebody, except for the only thing I can think of is if I don't view you as human, then I can do those things to you. And that's where I always think, like, how can we even watch these things happen then if I view you as a human? And you know, and so I think maybe that's why now some people are standing up more for race issues than they ever have, because they watched that video. But still, I don't really understand it, and I certainly don't understand it when it's connected with religion or someone's faith, because I grew up in the Catholic Church at a time when they just said God is love, and so I didn't really feel the push that a lot of younger people than me said, oh no, the church was against, and so I just, it doesn't correlate.
Yeah. Mixed messages out there in a number of ways. And I mean, talking about the media, just the idea that, you know, when we address stories, we try to share viewpoints from all walks of life, try to put ourselves in those viewpoints as well, try to empathize with that as we're sharing those viewpoints. I guess what you've mentioned that some of these issues haven't been covered. How do you feel we're doing it? What can we do better?
I think to try to expose it, expose more of what's being talked about in the administration. You know, you'll see a little one-line thing maybe if you're lucky. Dig into some of the things that are happening within our administration right now, because they're the ones that have declared war on the LGBT community, in particular, the trans community. There are a lot of people who just absolutely still do not know. I had a colleague who was very supportive of me. You know, somebody tried to tell her I was gay one time, and she said, oh yeah, I know, we were on a date last week. Well, I mean, it was just her way of pushing off somebody that was going to try to criticize. The point being is that she said, like, I think it was 2 months ago, that she didn't really understand why the LGBT community was so upset that really and truly, didn't we now have as many rights as anybody else? And I almost fell over because I thought she was far more informed than that. If supportive people don't know, you know, I think there's a lot of people that don't know. And I think one of the things you can do is dig a little deeper, find out what's going on, make it an activity to find out more about the attitude of the administration. I think the attitude of the general public is pretty wide open in terms of, yes, we support you, no, we don't support you, we think you should die, you know, you can marry my daughter even though you're somebody else's daughter. I mean, it's all over the place. Dig deeper to find out what's happening to the rights of LGBT people in the places of employment, because we haven't seen how this is going to pan out yet. In churches, in schools, it terrifies me, the lack of support for our kids. Our center has a group called Galaxy for our high school kids where they can come and be who they are and get support, and we have a middle school group called Nebula for our middle school kids. But I'll tell you, you know, we serve 11, 12 now counties. We're the only place that's got that kind of a program, from Madison to Minneapolis, I think. We're it. And so these kids need support. Huge, huge, huge amount of suicides with our kids, and not just our kids. I had a friend who hung herself because she didn't feel accepted. She was trans and she just didn't feel accepted. She was kind of mistreated and talked to poorly, and she didn't have good self-esteem anyway, and she didn't show up for work one day and they found her at home. Why? You know, what are the attitudes that people have that affect others so deeply? But I'd say dig a little bit. Don't wait for it to come out, bring it out.
I also want to ask about Pride this year. I know that celebrations were canceled, but I just want to hear from both of you. What does Pride mean to you this year compared to years before even? And how how has maybe even Pride progressed over the years from where it first started, which we know was with riots and protests?
50 years ago, Stonewall, when you know, Marsha P. Johnson and some of the other, and some of the drag queens that were at the Stonewall Inn that the police decided they were going to raid, and they just said, we've had enough. We have had enough. And so they started a riot, bricks and stones and you name it. And some of them knew where to hide after they threw the bricks. But they started it. We owe this all to them, the whole Pride movement. And that, like I said, this is the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. And I think that we're benefiting from that every single year. And you know, Pride means so much. It could get really convoluted trying to talk about it, but what Pride means to me is that I no longer have to hide. I'm not ashamed, and I refuse to hide. And I was fortunate when I moved here from Michigan to get a job at the center, and that has helped me even to just know, yep, here I am, and guess what, I'm not going anywhere, you know. And I think that the whole issue of Pride is huge, but I think it means that no, we're not hiding anymore. We don't have to hide anymore, you know. And if there's an issue with it, it's your issue, you know. I mean, it goes so much deeper and so much wider than that, but
I think this year it's sad that we're in this COVID pandemic, because this year I think a lot of things could have come out from Pride events. One being the 50th anniversary, and I think reminding folks that even though I think the movie Stonewall, which I didn't see, but I think they showed like a gay man throwing the first brick. If you haven't seen Laverne Cox's new movie Disclosure, you should watch it. It's very good. But even in there, she talks about the Stonewall was not a place that probably gay men and lesbian women who weren't part of counterculture were hanging out there. It was more a place of, you know, probably a lot of homeless folks, a lot of folks that were trans, a lot of folks that were drag queens. And so it was a place like that. But, you know, bars back then would get raided all the time, all over the place. And of course, you know, raiding a place like Stonewall was easier because of the kind of folks that would be hanging out in there, right? Because, you know, people would be supportive of, yeah, get them out of there. And, but, you know, reminding ourselves where we came from and reminding ourselves that, you know, many of those folks were also people of color, which sometimes in, I think, the LGBT community, we get, because there are so many white folks and they take some of the leads because of their privilege, and that we forget that, like, our community is very diverse, and that we have to be reminded that we need to work on our own issues, and racism is part of that in the LGBT community. And I think with everything that's happening this summer, a lot of that could have been tied into Pride and more education and stuff like that. And so I'm sad that we don't have that opportunity to do that in person. I think we can do that online, but I don't know. I think people are getting a little burnt out of everything online. I know I am. Just being here with you all, like, oh my God, this is so great.
I know, isn't this great?
Could we do? I need to do this more. And so I think that is unfortunate. But what I think is the importance of Pride, and because we're a smaller city, we probably get to keep some of this focus. When you get to bigger cities, like, you know, you have all the different people who fund Pride, right? So you, like in the cities, if you go up to Minneapolis, Target has a booth, and everybody has a booth that sells stuff, and the liquor people, they have lots of stuff going on, and so that becomes kind of the focus, right? Party, party. And there's education there, but I think when you come to our Pride, which is usually just right here in this part, you'll see what it really means. Like, you'll see the young people who have been, either they snuck out to come to Pride, or their parents brought them to Pride, but they're here. And what I've seen is the middle school, maybe high school young people going to the vendor that's selling Pride flags, and they'll find the Pride flag that is their identity, and then they clip it on kind of like a cape, and they'll be running around, and you'll see how proud they are of who they are. We have a table usually for the university, and we bring all these pins with different identities, and the middle schoolers in particular will come to our table maybe 30, 40 times, and they keep coming, just one more pin, I really like that one too, or I'm going to take this one for my friend, and then they put it on, of course. But that's the kind of stuff that Pride is all about, is giving people a voice and celebrating our history, that we have come a long way, but we still have a long way to go. And yeah, we're not going anywhere. Like, we have always been in your communities, we've always been in your churches, we've been in your schools, your families, and our world has given us an opportunity to no longer hide that. Right. But that's not true for everybody. I mean, there's still people who feel like they can't come out because they'll, maybe their church won't accept them, or their families won't accept them, and that, we still have a lot of work to do in regards to that. And it is good that we see more and more people coming out. I think that does help when athletes, major athletes come out. That helps those other athletes who are in the closet, playing football and are terrified that it won't work for them. And so we're making gains, but we still have a long way to go. And Pride also allows not only the LGBT community to come together, but also folks who want to be part of the LGBT community as an ally, as a support, as an advocate as well. And so having all those folks come together is a beautiful celebration.
It's a wonderful thing, and it was such a hard decision. Will's on the board, so was part of that decision. I work at the center. I'm not on the board, so I didn't get to vote, but I would have gone along with them anyway. It was a tough decision. Our Pride in the park is so important and so vital to us and to the gay community around here. People come to the center. We have people at the center who are, they're out and they're loud and they're proud and they're happy, and we have people at the center who come to the center because we're the only place that they know they'll be accepted. And they don't even go out to a lot of the things because they didn't want anybody to see them, and everything in between. And our Pride that we have here, Pride in the Park, helps all of those people, I think. They see everybody. They see kids, they see adults, they see partners, they see people, and even a couple of the churches. It's just a day of acceptance, and everybody cared about each other. Last year, and I have to tell you this because this will kind of help you see what I mean. You guys know about Moon Tunes, obviously. It ended up that Moon Tunes was going to have their music that night, and it was like a 50s, 60s. What was it? But it was a big one.
It was the revival of the big. I'm trying to blank on the big party that happened in a field somewhere. Woodstock. It was the Woodstock revival.
Yeah, that's right. And it was big. They said they expected about 10,000 people. Well, it just so happened that we had our Pride in the Park that day, and all of a sudden it was like, uh-oh, because they were working on the bandstand or band show.
And people came early to get seats.
Yeah, and part of it was, well, I don't know that this is going to work because, we want to have our food people here, and we want to have this and have that. And we said, well, can't we just kind of share it, and we'll have the food trucks in the middle, and won't it, and finally, begrudgingly, they agreed to because we started in the morning, excuse me, and they started in the evening. So here we are, we're all set up right here. All set up, nice setup, lots of really great vendors. It was wonderful. And then later in the day, like Will said, people came early. They had their lawn chairs that they were setting up because there was going to be a big crowd. So we kind of said, well,
we'll see how it goes.
See how it goes, here we go. Well, before you know it, the people that were set up earlier for Moon Tunes were visiting our vendors and walking around and visiting with people. And they had more and more people, so they spread further and further and further till they were sitting right in almost the center of our vendors. And people were dancing, and we didn't have one incident, not one. And it was so cool because the people that set up just came and started taking part with us, and we took part with them. It was
Became one big party.
Yeah, it was, and it was total acceptance, and let's have fun, no issues. That's what our Pride in the Park can bring, you know, that's part of what it was. And so it was very, very difficult to make the decision not to have it this year.
Well, I'm sure it's nice to have that memory, especially in this time of what it was like last year.
Right, because we were gonna collaborate with them again this year. Yeah, and they, I don't know, I think there was this whole big change in attitude at that point, and so it was kind of cool. You know, we're gonna be having some small events throughout the year and in the fall. We know we can't do Pride in the Park, but we're going to be doing some other things. We're having a big fundraiser online.
Saturday.
It's scary because we haven't done this before. We're all going to be virtual. We're determined to keep the Pride going.
Okay. Well, this has been a great conversation. Like you said, well, great to get together and talk about these things.
Yeah, for sure.
These are tough conversations. So I guess lastly, to summarize, how can people have difficult conversations with their friends, their family, someone they may know? How can they keep this conversation going?
I think for one thing, it's really important when you're having a conversation with friends or family or people that you don't really know, try not to be defensive, because then suddenly you're clashing. Just have a good talk, have an honest talk. It's very, very difficult sometimes to be open and honest with family members or friends who don't know, and you don't know how they feel. Sometimes they don't accept you, but talk anyway. Talk anyway. It's a difficult thing, but it's so worth it. You know, if you have to hide, you know how you feel and you know what your life is like, but if you can at all, have that conversation. You know, it's huge.
I always think, you know, addressing family is really hard. I've, you know, been on some groups where we're talking about even, you know, like race issues. How do I have these tough conversations with like my families about this, and people, you know, fearful of, I can't say anything. And I think we have to kind of confront that fear and say something. And, you know, you can think through the process, like what's the worst thing that would happen and what's the best thing that can happen. And I always feel like, especially, we have to remember that if you have any young people in your life, like they're listening to what's happening. And if I choose to not say something, then in that child's mind, I probably must agree, because I didn't say I don't agree. Right. And that says a lot. Our silence says a lot, and can be violent because we don't speak up. And having those conversations, and I think sharing, you know, why you might feel that way. I think sometimes our students, when we're in panels, will say to somebody like, well, you know, you want to know when I came out and when I knew. Well, you know, think about yourselves. You know, I assume people are heterosexual, right? And well, when did you know who you were attracted to? And you know, how did you feel that? And what did you do with that? And like, that's the same process I went through, only I already knew at whatever age that how I felt was wrong. Or I was confused because I felt this way and none of my friends felt this way, and I felt like something was wrong with me. You know, kind of describing, you know, asking people to think about themselves, and then putting what you know in, like if you have a friend, and why do you support your friend? You know, if you are the person that's trying to help educate someone, like, you know, talking about how I love my friend and this is what I love about them, and you know, there's how they, you know, who they're attracted to or their gender identity. That just adds to what I love about my friend. And family members may still be against it. Sometimes when you have those face-to-face, people are afraid to respond or to do anything, and they may need time to think about it. And you know, I know even you know, as an adult, that, you know, sometimes we're still afraid to talk to our parents or our grandparents, or maybe you have a mom who says, you can't tell grandma because she will die, she will have a heart attack, and you will, you know, and you know, you hear things like this, and you know, people, you know, are like, okay, and my mom said I can't, so I can't. But you know, trying to give people the benefit of the doubt, and you know, obviously, if you're fearful that something is going to happen to you, I always tell students, like, if you're going to come out during a holiday, like, be prepared. Like, do you have to live there for the rest of the month because the holiday's that long? Well, where are you going to live? Do your parents pay for school? As if they do, and now they say we're not paying anymore, can you continue in school because school's important? So having those plans if you're fearful, and being prepared. But you know, you never know how somebody's going to respond. Sometimes you think they're going to be horrible and they're not, and sometimes you think they're going to be great and they aren't.
Yeah.
So I think being prepared, thinking it through, having a friend that can help you. I always tell students, if you come out, you know, and you're really scared, have a friend waiting outside the house so that you can just run out, get in the car, and be gone and be safe. So making sure that you're safe when you do those things. And you know, I think being able to have some of those conversations with folks, people might even be happy that you bring it up, because they might be afraid of talking about it with you as well.
Mm-hmm. And you know, I think in a lot of cases, if you're ashamed or you act ashamed, then they're going to treat you that way. You know, my mom was not happy. My dad cried because he thought he would never have grandkids. But point being is that, you know, I hear about people who say, well, I asked my parents if I could bring my partner and they said no. You know, and I sometimes I don't understand it, and yet I do, because I know it can be awful in some cases. You know, but I never said, can I? I said, okay, we'll be there. Easter's at 3 o'clock. Okay, we'll be there. And I never asked permission, and so I think they accepted it a little better because I wasn't ashamed of it, and I didn't give them the opportunity to shame me. And you were talking about grandma will die. I have to tell you, my wife's mother is 91, and when we decided to get married, she decided to come out to her mother. She's 91 years old, and Joe just came out to her 2 years ago. You know, and she always thought if she told her mom she would die, that she would kill her. That's what she thought. And then she finally came out 2 years ago, and she was like, oh my God, why didn't I do this before? Mom is so cool. Calls me Joe's sweetie, and
Yeah.
we love each other.
Totally at the wedding. It was wonderful.
Yeah, wasn't she great? She gave Joe away at the wedding. So yeah, I mean, sometimes you just have to gut it out and see what happens. You're going to be happier being you and not having to hide from people that you love, you know? So
I think one thing people always say, well, why do LGBT folks have to come out? Like, I'm straight, I don't come out. I'm cisgender, I don't have to come out. But, you know, we have to, because people still make those assumptions about you. And if you can choose not to come out, that is like a person's choice not to. But, you know, that choice is really damning to yourself, because, you know, you can't talk about what you're doing over the weekend with your significant other or partner, because if you do, you know, people will ask you questions. Well, you know, and they'll make the assumptions. Well, who is he, and you know, where are you two going? And then you have to, like, okay, now what pronouns should I use for this person? And then it gets all convoluted in your head, and then you know, you don't want to, if you really want to be authentic and be with the people you work with, you want to be honest and say, you know, hey, we're going to Pride this weekend. I'm so happy. I want to have a picture on my desk. I want right. that. And, you know, unfortunately, that is something that we still have to do. And it is so freeing. The choice is either, you know, to be silent and to hide, or to just be yourself and come out. And I know that for myself, that being authentic with who I am has been so helpful for me and for my mental health. And And I see that in young people when they find themselves. The sad part with young people is, you know, we'll have students involved in UWL who are really involved in the LGBT stuff, and they, like they're the president of something or they work in the Pride Center, but their parents don't know what they're doing. And so when then they go home over break, and I'm like, well, what are you going to tell your parents? I tell them I work in a diversity center. And I'm like, oh, okay. But like their parents don't even know, and I'm like, that's so sad that they'd have to come home and suddenly change into something they're not, and not even share like, I was voted president of the Gay Straight Alliance, I'm so happy. And so when people come out, some people I think, you know, like, oh, they're just bragging or throwing it in our face. No, we want to be real with you, and we want to have that authentic relationship, and so I have to do that. And to be, you know, if somebody ever comes out to you, if you are chosen to be that person, you know, just know that the person that's coming out to you, like, for some reason felt like they would be safe with you, and that this is really something that you should be very proud that somebody came to you.
It's a matter of trust.
Yeah, it's totally a matter of trust, and that, you know, you felt it was important to share that part with you, and so, you know, be grateful that somebody did that, and love them and let them know how much you respect what they had to say, and that you appreciate that they felt like they could come to you.
So just being a good listener too, in other words.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, be an ally.
That's an important message.
Our allies are huge in our community. They're extremely important. We have a lot of allies that volunteer at the center. And, you know, people say, is it okay if I come there if I'm straight? Yeah, come on. Like I said, our allies are a huge part of our community. And, you know, one of the things that we do know is that if we have allies that speak up for us, sometimes it's more impactful than if we do. People will listen to somebody who's not LGBT talk about it instead of looking at us like, well, yeah, you would say that, you know. So yeah, be a good ally. There are a lot of ways you can do that, but acceptance is the beginning.
Well, thank you both for being a part of this conversation.
Sure.
It was wonderful to talk to you.
Thanks for having this conversation.
Yeah.
We appreciate it.
Really, thank you for.
And happy Pride.
Yes, happy
Yes,
Pride
Thank
as
you.
well.
Thank you very much.
You too.